Maya Mael stole my collection of vintage skeleton keys to sell at pawn and buy herself a new phone. Part 1. My best friend recommended Reddit to begin with, has suggested this subreddit, and even said I should have posted here first. I'm dividing the post into two halves to make it easier to read. Maya Mael is insanely entitled, and my wife's enabling of her has made our marriage very hard at times. Mael has come to us for money a lot because she keeps spending herself into a hole since she's a hoarder and a shopaholic. Her house is full of garbage, junk, and unopened stuff she never uses. The house is rodent infested too. She has one semi-clean room in the whole building, and it's the master bedroom. She's mocked it up like a little studio apartment with a futon to sleep on and use as a couch, an entertainment center with TV and streaming, and a makeshift kitchen consisting of the adjoining bathroom, a mini fridge, and a microwave. Mael's also overweight because she eats out a lot. Recently, Mael came to us wanting me specifically to buy her a new smartphone as an unprompted gift, and she threw a massive fit when I refused. And I mean a child temper tantrum kind of fit. Why did she want a new phone so suddenly? Hers was 2 years old, that's literally it. As far as I know, it still worked fine. Even my wife has confirmed this. But Mael was resolute that she deserved a new phone. And before leaving, Mael yelled at us that we're supposed to be pampering her now that she's an old woman. She's 53. My wife also didn't want to buy her mother the phone because she gave her money not long before to make sure her bills were paid. I have quite a collection of vintage skeleton keys. And I mean good ones. Like ones to particular hotels, the large ornate sergeants, brass railroad keys, reading hardware, etc. My collection as a whole should easily be worth $2,000 to $3,000. Some of those keys are super rare. I kept them in a locked display cabinet. But a few days ago I came home to find my entire collection gone. The cabinet had been forced open. I checked the CCTV for the living room and saw my Mael force open the cabinet with a small crowbar. She then put all the keys in a couple of boxes she brought with her and left with them. I called Mael right away and demanded she return my collection. She nonchalantly told me she sold the entire collection at pawn already and used the money for her new phone. Then said it was my fault and she had to do it because I wouldn't give her the money. My wife was seemingly on my side until I said I was going to call police. She begged me to just drop it, and even suggested I just start a new collection. I refused to let it go because a lot of those keys are not only expensive, they're irreplaceable. I spent 10 years building that collection. But my wife kept blowing up at me and telling me to just let it go. So I slept in the guest room that night and sought online help the next day when my best friend told me to try Reddit. I'd been a lurker before, but making an account wasn't hard. Maya Mael has been trouble in the past, but this was the first time I know of that she'd stolen from us. I needed help, so I asked here. The resounding advice finally made me pull my head out of my bum to realize I was the only one keeping my marriage afloat. And it would likely never get any better if my wife wasn't on my side when her own mother steals something irreplaceable from me. Now to answer some quick questions I got before. 1. How did Mael get into the house? My wife unilaterally gave her a key when we moved in, that's why. 2. Why did I have CCTV cameras in the living room? Really? Wouldn't you do that if you had something valuable on display there? 3. Is Mael on drugs? No idea, she's always been crazy. 4. Did Mael steal from us before? Not that I have been able to tell. And I've checked everything I could think of. 5. What kind of phone did Mael get? Not a clue. But probably one of the cheaper smartphones with the amount of money she got selling my stuff. Unless she's on a payment plan. 6. Did my wife use my money to placate her mother before? Yes, she did. We primarily have separate accounts, but we do have a joint account we pay the bills with, so it's not used for savings. In 2 years of marriage, I'd say it happened roughly 5 times. Every time my wife took money from the joint account for her mother, she always replaced it on her next payday. Though in hindsight, I think she only did so because she knew I'd never let it go, because she would always have an attitude with me for a few days after. I was in a bad marriage fog before, but this whole situation has snapped me right out of it. 7. Will I lock down my credit? Already I have. Though I'm not sure my wife or her mother would be so stupid to do something like that after Mael was recently arrested. I have gotten my collection back and hidden it somewhere my wife and Mael have no idea where it is. I'll provide more detail in another post tomorrow. Edit, since it keeps being mentioned, yes, I did call police, yes, an arrest was made, yes, my wife is a soon-to-be ex, know that I'm taking many precautions right now. Part 2. Back to what happened that day. Police did come and take my statement a bit over an hour after I called the non-emergency line. I had video footage and the documentation of my collection ready. And then there was some texts I went out of my way to get from MIL to bait her into a confession. I wanted as much evidence as possible so she couldn't lie to police. When I texted her demanding she get my collection back, she actually LOL'd and told me not a chance. And even boasted that she thought I was a pathetic son-in-law and my key collection was tacky anyway. I told her to at least tell me what pawn shop she sold the keys to so I could go buy them back, and how much they paid her for them. And the dimwit admitted it all right away with glee in text. I had everything I needed for the police before they even showed up. The cops took the whole matter more seriously than I thought. I was worried they'd call it a civil matter since the thief was my MIL and she had a key to the house. But they arrested MIL before long. And police went to the pawn shop before it closed to retrieve my collection. I got it all back from police after a couple of days. And for the moment I put the collection in a safe, secure place that no one can get to. The pawn shop pretty much gave up the entire key collection to police right away like it was a bag of hot potatoes. Though I scrutinized every important key brought back, as far as I can tell it's all there. That was a huge sigh of relief. I took time off work and barely slept for 2 days because of this ordeal. Also, the cabinet MIL broke into is pretty much a loss since she mangled the lock and doors prying it open. Thankfully it wasn't an antique, and just something I got used for $50. So I'm just going to take it to the dump sooner or later. From her texts before, I found out MIL sold the whole collection to the pawn for a whopping total of $300. Angry face, for a collection of hundreds of antique keys valued at $2 to $3 grand as a total, that low number felt like a punch in the gut to me. Likely the pawnbroker knew how valuable the collection could be as a whole. I mean, it's not like hitting a jackpot or anything. But money is still money. Especially when a dumb little lady walks in with a box of goodies. Anyone else hear Mr. Krabs laughing? Anyway, the cost of repayment to the shop was supposed to be on MIL. But my wife paid them back out of our joint account instead. From what the shop owner said, MIL told them the key collection belonged to her deceased husband. And she was sick of the whole collection sitting in storage. So they believed her. But just to be clear, she's not a widow. Her husband divorced her and left the state around 15 years ago. MIL lives off Social Security and food stamps. She also holds garage sales every few months. And she often demanded our soda and beer cans so she could get the deposit money recycling them. MIL doesn't drive, she gets around on an electric scooter that tows a bicycle trailer. She lives in a long paid-off house, and she would not be having money troubles if she wasn't overspending every month. And she always counts on my wife to pick up the slack when she comes up short. My wife and I got in a huge fight when she got home because I had her mother arrested. But I told her I'm done with her enabling of her toxic mother. I said I was changing the locks ASAP and banning her mother from the house. And I also said that either we got marriage counseling or I'd be inquiring about my options for separation from an attorney. I thought my wife would beg me not to do that. But instead she just called me horrible, packed a suitcase and walked out to go to a motel. I just sat on the couch and let her go. She repeatedly looked like she was waiting for me to ask her to stay. But I didn't. In the morning she texted me she'd be bailing her mother out and wanted me to transfer her the money to pay for it since I was the one who got her mother arrested. When I said no, all I got back was a sarcastic wow, and that was it. Not too long later I had a gut feeling and checked the balance on the shared bank account. And my wife had taken out a lot of money. I wasn't sure if all that was needed for bail, so I called the pawn shop later. The owner confirmed my wife had come in and paid him back the $300 that he paid her mother for the keys. He was also quite angry and said he didn't want any of us in his shop ever again. I understood his anger and weirdly enough had a fairly long talk with this guy. And he understands now that I'm not part of the crazy. I tried to call and text my wife for hours. But she didn't answer. That evening I managed to find her. I knew which motel she'd likely go to, and I was right. It was both cheap and not far away. I found her car and then figured out which room she was in. She looked positively shocked to see me when she opened the door. I confronted her about the money she'd used from our shared account. She basically said that since I refused to pay her mother's bail after I was the one who had her arrested, she got the money from me another way. Then smugly stated she wasn't paying that money back into the shared account this time, and told me that's the karma I get, before shutting the door in my face. Then said through the door she'd call the cops on me if I didn't leave. The smug look she'd given me reminded me of nasty teenage girls when they get their way. It really ticked me off. I already knew my marriage was pretty much over. But that night it really sank in. I had a long sit down with some old video games and cola to think about my future. The house is rented, so I'm not renewing my half of the lease and will soon be apartment hunting. The last month of the lease is March. But I may leave sooner, depending on how soon I can find an apartment. We have no kids yet, thank God. So that's another thing I currently have in my favor. The next day I changed the locks on the house and removed all of my money from the joint bank account and stopped all automated payments to and from it. I made sure to take only the amount of money I'd put into the account. There was still more than enough in it for me to break even and still leave the minimum required balance on the account. Either way, the cost of Emil's bail and paying back the pawn shop was now entirely out of my wife's pocket now. And I don't think she's noticed yet. But it shouldn't be long. I've been to a couple different divorce lawyers already, and I picked the second one since the first seemed like they were only there for a paycheck. I'll have the divorce papers served soon. I love my wife, but it's clear she didn't love me. So I can't stay with her anymore. She can have her thieving hoarder mommy all to herself now. We both have very comparable incomes, so I'll be pushing for a clean split divorce. This woman didn't deserve me, and I fell for her act. She didn't want a husband, she wanted an insurance plan. I'll be clear on this, I won't be changing my mind about divorce. My soon-to-be ex-wife can beg and love bomb all she wants, if she even bothers to. I've never been her number one. And I'm not gonna settle for being number two in my own marriage. It is over. I 27M hurt the feelings of my girlfriend's 28F sister 21F while I was performing stand-up. Now my girlfriend won't talk to me. I'm a somewhat successful 27-year-old comic working my way up in the comedy scene in the city I'm living in. I'm dating a 28-year-old woman from here and she is very supportive of my career as I am with hers. She has a 21-year-old little sister that I think is a spoiled sorority brat, but I very rarely see her, so I pay her very little mind. Just the other night, I was performing at a comedy club and my girlfriend was coming to watch me perform. The night before the show, she informed me that her little sister was coming to the show with some friends. To me, this news was a possible red flag. To give some background, my girlfriend comes from a pretty affluent background where ritzy vacations and luxuries were the norm, whereas I come from quite the opposite. I come from a large family where we had to wear the busted pair of shoes for a little bit longer until the money was finally scraped together. For a lot of people, this difference could be a little intimidating, but it's never been a big issue. She is very level-headed, works hard, and never looks down on others not as fortunate as her or her family. Her sister, on the other hand, is quite the opposite. She goes to a university that is completely paid for, has all the niceties, and lets you know when you don't. She can get rude with people quite easily, especially when she's dealing with someone working a low-pay job or someone that she views as lower in status. Now, I've only acted as a silent observer to her behavior because I've only seen her a handful of times and I quite frankly didn't want to deal with her. When my girlfriend told me she was coming to watch me perform, I grew pretty alarmed. The people that I work with, and most of the comedy crowd, for that matter, is a pretty working class group of people. They deal with hard truths and can laugh when they are made fun of. Whenever my girlfriend's sister gets put in similar situations, she definitely does not have the same reaction. In fact, she handles it just about as well as Vince Wilfork finding out the buffet closed. I also went with her and my girlfriend to a small concert at a bar and she was rude and disrespectful to the performers the whole time. I told my girlfriend my concerns about her sister coming, she wouldn't enjoy herself, she would make a scene, or she would interrupt another comic set, the ultimate sin. My girlfriend said it wouldn't be a problem. I buckled and said that she could come, but I would not be held liable for whatever happened in the club. I tend to be playful when shutting down hecklers, but I know the 3 other comics performing and they're definitely not. I have a 3-strike rule, but they swing like goddamn Sammy Sosa on the first pitch. She agreed and that was that until the next day. We met the sister and friends beforehand and went to the club. The first comic was a lady I know and she was spot on that night. She's by no means a pretty woman, so the girls started making sly comments to each other about it until I told them to cut it out, which they did. I then went backstage to the green room, but from the little bits I saw and heard, they were on fairly good behavior. Then my set happened. My first 6 or 7 minutes started out really well. The crowd was great and I felt in the zone. I then started working through a bit about North Face being tacky, and this proved to be the catalyst for the sister and her friends. They started talking loudly in the back, to which I told them to stop. I looked to my girlfriend to corral them in and provide some silent reinforcements. Those reinforcements never came. About 2 minutes later, I was working through a piece about being hairy, to which the sister made a comment. At this point, I noticed she and her friends had put down quite a few drinky poos, so basically I started making fun of them being sloppy drunks. This shut them up for a little bit. I then had a piece about my mom, to which the little sister basically made a loud comment about my mom being a slut. She threw a third pitch and I choked up on the bat and began to swing away like Joaquin Phoenix in a room full of Marvin the Martians. I called her out for being a petulant rich girl, made fun of her appearance, and ended up calling her cunt drunkula. The crowd was really into it, so I was eventually able to cut off the set with some grace, but I was livid. When the crowd left and the lights went up, the sister came up to me and started getting in my face. I walked back into the green room and asked the bouncer to take care of it, and she eventually left with her friends. As I saw my girlfriend afterwards, she seemed a little upset. I told her that I was furious that she didn't help me out with controlling her sister. She asked why I was so upset whenever the set went so well. I think there was a little passive aggression in the question. I told her that even though that set went well, if a heckler catches me on a night where I'm not on my game, it fucks my entire performance. We eventually cut the conversation and drove home. The next day, my girlfriend's sister left a message for my girlfriend in tears about how the night went. She was upset at the things I said and wanted an apology. I told my girlfriend that was not going to happen and I deserved an apology. Even though the sister doesn't view what I do as a job, that is my livelihood. If I pulled a similarly disruptive stunt in someone else's place of work, I would most likely be arrested. My girlfriend did not take to this well and hasn't talked to me for the last 2 days besides small talk at dinner. I think she may be upset about the rich girl comments I made to her sister. To be honest, I do get a little resentful when I hear the stories of my girlfriend's life of affluence growing up, but I never bring this up and I never try to make her feel pity for the way I grew up. My question is, what should be the next course of action? I refuse to even look at her sister until she brings an apology with her, but I love my girlfriend and not talking to her is killing me. How should I handle this nightmare of a situation? TLDR, girlfriend's sister heckled me while I was performing stand-up, I went nuclear on her ass, and now girlfriend won't speak to me. Edit, I'm sitting down this afternoon to talk to my girlfriend about the whole thing when she gets back from lunch. Her tone seemed fairly neutral on the phone, so I'm just playing it by ear until then. Update. Just a little clarification on my last post. At the show, I didn't use any personal information while stopping my girlfriend's sister from heckling, I just used what was visible. I didn't even mention that I knew her. I also should have mentioned that this show I was doing was a big deal for me. This venue I was at is the kind of place you perform at and then shortly afterwards start receiving calls to do televised comedy specials. If I went overboard with the comments, it's because if I lost the crowd in this show, that could have been really bad for my career. That's not to excuse what I said or how I said it, just some background. So, a lot has happened since my last post about the aftermath of my girlfriend's sister visiting my comedy show. On Monday, I was returning back to my apartment after doing a spot for a radio station. As I walked back in, I saw that my girlfriend's dad was there and waiting to talk with me. He had stopped by to say hello to my girlfriend, but apparently his real reason for stopping by was to talk to me. He's normally a pretty even-keeled guy, but he was definitely miffed that day. Basically, he wanted to talk with me about what went down at the comedy club the previous week. We sat down in the dining room and I could tell this discussion would be a long one. My girlfriend's sister told him about the show, and he was justifiably upset that I called his daughter a cunt. I stayed cool and just told him that I wasn't saying it to intentionally hurt his daughter's feelings, I was simply trying to get back control of my show and the audience. He kept on about how awful that was and it sounded like he didn't get the whole story from his daughter. I asked him if I could give my side of the story just so he had some frame of reference, to which he let me. I told him about her interrupting and heckling numerous times after my initial concerns. I said that I had gotten carried away with my choice of words, but I had to do that in order to keep the crowd. I didn't pose this as an excuse, just where I was coming from. He wasn't as upset, but he still was angry. He started hounding me about my line of work and what kind of job makes you call people that. Now, I think this line of questions stemmed from some deep negative feelings about my career as a comic. We ventured onto that topic fairly soon. I told him that I get it. It's not the most traditional or stable job. My girlfriend went to a very prestigious university and her friends are getting married to doctors, lawyers, and executives and having lovely families. There is nothing wrong with those people, their professions, or their way of life, but that's just not me. It seemed that my girlfriend's father thought that I just performed some stand-up every now and then and just farted around all day. I told him about what I really do and how I prepare. I spend a lot of time writing for some small magazines and newspapers, I do comedy spots at radio stations, and I do comedy and improv lessons. If I'm not doing that, I'm writing my own stuff or a myriad of other performance-related tasks. After this he seemed to back off a whole bunch, but he still was pretty upset about that cunt druncula comment. I explained that the remark was definitely heavy-handed, but it would not have been said if there was no heckling. I also explained that I would be getting in contact with the sister soon to talk about the events of that evening. He seemed to like that course of action and left shortly afterwards. I still don't think my girlfriend's dad thinks super highly of my career, but I feel like that was the best face-to-face conversation we've had, and he at least now knows that I work hard and am passionate about my career. He also wasn't completely pacified, but that's alright, I can work on that after all this stuff. After this, my girlfriend and I got a chance to talk about the evening at the comedy club. I said that I'm sorry for going so nuclear on her sister. She said that she wasn't mad about this or even the use of the word cunt, but the negative comments I made about her sister being a rich girl. She wanted to know if I felt the same way about her. I told her that while I do seem to have an inferiority complex when it comes to people from wealthy backgrounds, I view her as the woman that I love, not Cruella de Vil. I also apologized if my comments made her feel undervalued, that was not my intent. She asked me some more specifics about my upbringing and I told her a little more in detail. She asked me if I thought about counseling to work through some of these issues and I said that I'd be down for that. Let's face it, a comedian is only as good as shrink. I'm scheduled for a few appointments in the upcoming weeks. If I can get the counselor to laugh, that's a win for me. She apologized for not getting her sister to be quiet during the set. She said the whole thing seemed like a nightmare and she kind of froze up when her sister started yelling. I told her that I accepted her apology and offered to meet with her sister soon to go over the events of the evening. She seemed happy about that and this weekend we'll both be meeting her sister over lunch. So far, it seems like a lot of these issues are slowly but surely getting resolved through some solid communication. Now we'll just see how the meeting with the sister goes. I'll be sure to keep everyone updated. TLDR, I talked with girlfriend's father about the comments, then with my girlfriend. While not everything is completely perfect, there seems to be a lot more understanding from all parties, myself included. We'll be meeting shortly with girlfriend's sister. Final update. Sorry about taking forever to reply, I got crazy busy over these last couple of months. When I last left off, I was set to meet up with my girlfriend's sister, which we did. So, my girlfriend and I met up in the parking lot of this restaurant. I had just finished a writing session at a magazine office and she had just finished with work. We make our way to the restaurant and sit down. The sister is already there and waiting. We sit down and attempt to start some small talk, but she's noticeably upset. As we're looking through the menu, her father comes into the restaurant and sits down at our table. This caught me way off guard. We sit awkwardly for about 5 minutes until I eventually say, "All right, let's get this out on the table. Look, sister, the other night I called you a name that was pretty harsh. I'm sorry that your feelings got hurt, but you heckled me during my set. That is extremely rude. It would be like if I came to your job and started throwing around your materials while you were working." I was gonna go on and ask for an apology until my girlfriend's dad piped up and said to me, "Are you not gonna even apologize?" I looked at my girlfriend who was kinda shying away from the whole scene and looked back at him and said, "No, I'm not." This was a huge opportunity for me, and if she would throw me off my game, it could have seriously messed up my career. The sister began to talk about how embarrassed I made her in front of her friends and how the C word was so offensive. At this point, my girlfriend also said, "Yeah, you didn't have to be that rude to me." I was flabbergasted. I thought she was going to back me up on this. I thought we had agreed on how shitty her sister's behavior was. For the next 10 minutes or so, I was somewhat speechless, which for me is a rarity, as they told me how out of line I was. My girlfriend wasn't super vocal, but she still jumped in occasionally. It got to a point where I eventually said, "This is ridiculous. I didn't come here to be lectured. I'm leaving." I left the restaurant and drove home. My girlfriend called me from and tried to get me to come back. I replied, "There's no way I'm going back to that lion's den. I want to talk about this when you get back home." About an hour later, she arrives at the apartment. I ask her, "What the hell was that?" She went on to tell me how when she talked to her sister and parents and realized that what I said was really mean and I should have been more apologetic. I thought there was an understanding all around, but I was way wrong. We'd never had any big-time disagreements or discussions, but that night, we had it out. I guess she was beginning to feel some pretty big resentment about my career. She had just gotten a promotion recently and she said she lied to her coworkers about my job to not feel embarrassed. This blew me away. I asked her straight up, "Do I embarrass you?" She said, "Yes." At this point, I grabbed my things and left for a friend's house. I was too upset to stay the evening. I went back 2 days later and for the next week or so, we barely talked. Then one evening, she asked to talk to me. She said, "Look, I think I've came to the realization that we are two wildly different people and I don't think we can reconcile that. I think it'd be best if we broke up." My first thought was to say no, but as I began to think about it more, she was right. I wasn't exactly what she was looking for and I don't want to be with someone that feels embarrassed around me. I spent the next 2 weeks looking for a place and moved out. The whole thing went down really civilly. She gave me time to get my things in order. I am not mad at her, she has every right to not date me. I hope she's not mad at me, but if she is, oh well. Obviously dating someone is fun, but being single is also nice because I can focus more on my writing and career, which I think is really starting to take off. So in a way, it's not a happy ending, but it is a happy ending. TLDR, went to dinner with girlfriend to confront her sister, dad showed up and they dogpiled on me. I left, girlfriend and I fought later that evening and eventually broke up a week later. I'm on my own now and excited for whatever's next.